When it comes to horror anything, I'm a mess. The last scary movie I watched was Nightmare on Elm Street. Insidious terrified me. I just can't handle the imagery present in horror. The same goes with video games. Like, I have some Resident Evil games just sitting on my shelf and such, but I'd say the closest thing I've played to a horror game is Parasite Eve, and even that wasn't particularly scary. Why am I giving you this information? I want you to know my background going into the visual novel Higurashi When They Cry. See, I cheated because in other horror video games, you can't cover your eyes and wait for the scene to pass. So I chose a horror game where all I have to do is click. But you know what? That doesn't mean it isn't scary. In fact, this could almost be considered 999 accenting the game, for the first part at least. But I was brave enough to click on and hide under my sheets for months. Even before I started, I accidentally titled the file When They Cray, which turned out to be a little too accurate for a typo. And look exactly how big this file is. Coincidence? I friggin' hope so. However, I'm glad I stuck with it because, although its length may be too much for some, Higurashi When They Cry is a fantastic visual novel that deserves most of the praise it's been given, and then some. Higurashi When They Cry is the English translation of the early 2000s Japanese visual novel, and this English version was released in 2009 onward. The game is divided into 8 chapters. The first 4 chapters, referred to as question arcs, and the later 4 chapters, titled When They Cry Kai, are known as the answer arcs, which provide solutions to this murder mystery. How do you play? Well, if you thought that Ever 17 had no gameplay, then you haven't played this game. As the player, all you have to do is click and read. I know that's a lot, you might want to write it down. I recall there only being one choice the entire time that affected nothing story-wise, and in this respect, the game is just a sound novel. Text, no voice acting, pictures, some character portraits, music, just you reading along the chapters with breaks in between to read the tips, which fill in some gaps in the story. Let's get into the actual premise of the series, and exactly why it's worth your time. Higurashi takes place during June 1983 at a fictional rural Japanese village called Hinamizawa, a rather isolated little area which has approximately 2,000 people as its population. Keiichi Maebara moves to Hinamizawa and befriends his new classmates Rena, Mion, Rika, and Satoko, who are all conveniently single young ladies, but don't worry, it's not one of those visual novels. Keiichi joins their after-school club activities, which consists mostly of card games, board games, as well as insane punishments for the loser, like wearing a maid costume home. Hinamizawa appears to be a normal, peaceful rural village to Keiichi, and a welcome change from his previous life in the city. However, this peace abruptly ends at the annual Watanagashi festival, a celebration to commemorate the local god, Oyashiro. Keiichi learns that every year for the past 4 years, one person has been found murdered and another person has gone missing on the day of the festival. Each of the 8 arcs follows this basic premise, as Keiichi and his friends are slowly dragged into the madness and secrets of the village. Is there really an annual curse, or is it just a coincidence? The truth is slowly revealed through a murder mystery riddled with blood and the sins of the past. Before I tackle the story, let's quickly run down the characters. The game is actually very smart about its character usage, as they only stick to about a dozen major characters over the course of a 50-hour story, focusing on quality over quantity. Our protagonist is Keiichi. Initially, it seems like he's nothing more than the player's proxy, and my first opinion of him wasn't saved by the fact that his first conversation is about Morningwood. However, you'll soon find Keiichi to be much more of his own character, someone you can sympathize with under his horrible circumstances and root for him if he's able to overcome it. As the outsider, like the player, you can jump into his shoes and understand what he's going through. Therefore, he forms the perfect balance of being both the persona of the player and his own dynamic character. The four main girls initially seem like they were covering different fetishes. Mion is the older tomboyish leader, Rena is the classic nice and wifeable one, Satoko is the younger mischievous one, Rika is the other younger adorable one. Again, I think the first part of the first chapter is almost meant to parody the harem genre by dragging these characters into this kind of plot and throwing the genre on its head into a murder mystery. It forms this absurdly compelling contrast, unsettling to say the least. However, leaving it at that would be insulting to these characters. Each of the girls, along with the people you meet later, all have these certain dark secrets or motivation that are realistic and allows them to transcend their given stereotypes in a surprisingly realistic way. Everyone gets good development, screen time, and it's honestly hard to find a character to dislike. There's Oishi, the police officer, and he's on the cusp of retirement, desperate to resolve this murder mystery before he goes. Or Tomitake, the local photographer with a good heart but awful luck. Takano, a nurse obsessed with the village and its dark secrets, or Akasaka, or Kasai, or Airi. By the end of the game, there was not one character I was sick of, or even downright hated. Even the antagonist, or antagonists, are amazing. All of these characters had believable and relatable motivations, were well written, and they play off of each other extremely well. If I had to find one thing to complain about, I'd say you probably want to smack at least some of them in the back of the heads for the stupid ass decisions they seem to make. Like how Keiichi's parents are gone more than the parents in Home Alone 3 or something. But the reasons why people make decisions are usually well explained here, and they make logical sense most of the time, so I can't complain. Let's get into the actual story. I'd first like to point out that this game has an extremely slow start. The game spends the first couple of hours of each chapter letting you get settled into the environment, the peaceful village of Hinamizawa, and giving you the player an emotional attachment to the characters and setting, following along with the silly adventures, club activities, and random humorous banter. After a while though, you see the flickers of the overall murder mystery plot as the stability around you slowly caves in, and you give into the insanity of everything. So be forewarned that this is definitely a slow burn that you have to slow down and enjoy. Trust me when I say it's worth the wait. The game purposely lets you have these happier times beforehand, so it creates an extreme juxtaposition before everything falls apart later on. What I'm trying to get at is, don't just stop an hour in because you think it's boring. Another thing that might throw people off is the overall setup of When They Cry, which is actually a lot like the movie Groundhog Day. Each chapter is basically a repeat, where characters are put in the same basic setting of the isolated village, and things generally go okay until the day of the festival, where everything goes to shit afterwards. However, each chapter has a different subgenre per se, though it's all tied to the same themes and overall murder mystery plot. Think of it as ice cream. The premise is the same, but there are a lot of different flavors. Chapter 1 is about a slow decay into paranoia and chaos. Chapter 2 is more of a straight murder mystery. 3 gives you the perspective of a murderer. 4 is like a buddy cop movie. 5 explores a tragic protagonist. 6 is about an unavoidable tragedy that offers a flicker of hope. 7 strengthens this hope. And 8 is almost a full-out action movie. See, this is actually the biggest strength and weakness of When They Cry. It's a giant, epic story full of great themes, messages, ethical considerations, moments that make you laugh, cry, make your heart run a million beats per second, having you cheer at the computer screen in the middle of the night. It covers every part of your emotional spectrum. However, this game took me almost 2 months to finally beat. It's quite an investment in time, and you can feel it in some places. I also felt like it was trying to cover too much ground. The game hits on giant concepts like world history, international politics, life, death, sins, fate, determinism, child molestation, murder, demons, suicides. But it also covers smaller things like friendship, love, learning to enjoy your life. By no means should all of this work together in one game, but you know what? It does! I thought the game was trying to stretch itself too far from a core theme, but it ultimately pulls it all together as a game about life, not simply a whodunit. It's an emotional ride filled with sadness, moments when you might get tears in your eyes. You'll have fear, disgust, everything, jealousy, betrayal, foreshadowing, build-up, payoff. Honestly, it's the ultimate story. Yeah, you know what, this is a lot to cover. Let's at least break it into smaller pieces. The horror elements of the game are done exceedingly well in my opinion. Though, as I mentioned earlier, my knowledge of the genre is rather limited. For the first 6 chapters, though the first 4 especially, you'll probably be scared. You never get comfortable when shit really starts to hit the fan, and the game makes sure you're on edge using several sources, whether it's not knowing who you can trust, or suggestive dialogue, or the setting itself. I'd say the biggest element of the fear is not knowing who to trust though. And speaking of that, I have to point out that the less you know going into this game, the better. Because, at least for the first chapter, I feel like a simple Google image search for the series can be spoilerific, so be careful of that if you plan to play. Now for the actual horror elements. I know the game is known for its gruesome killings and morbid scenes, but for squeamish people like me, have no fear because they don't really show anything, they leave it to your imagination, for better or worse. The real fear comes in how the game psychologically attacks you, using this creepy small town atmosphere to just get right at you. It has some awesome sound design that I'll get into later. It's all about the situations you're put in rather than some cheap jump scare or excessive violence. It saves its big scares for certain moments. Shit starts to get real, your pulse is pounding, you will feel fear. However, it's not always there. They reserve scares for big moments, but in between, there's straight out diabolical foreshadowing, even in the silly parts, like when your group plays Clue. Get it? Because you're trying to solve a murder mystery! There's just lots of creepy double meanings in the dialogue, intentionally there to screw with you, and the irony is aplenty. The writers know when to give you detail, and then they know when to leave things out, but ultimately, it keeps you on edge, especially when things start to fall apart. It's not for the faint of heart, and it can have a sick sense of humor. And it is a psychological thriller in every sense. I would be lying if I was saying I wasn't scared stupid for the first 3 chapters, but if you can get through it, you'll be glad you did. It's scary enough to give you a cold sweat before bed, but not quite enough to make you quit before solving this mystery. It's very accessible, even to a coward like me. The mystery elements of the game, I'm a little bit more mixed about. Let's start with the good. First of all, the game keeps you guessing the entire time. At some points you may feel like you understand, when all of a sudden, something else flips you back to square one. You can't make any assumptions, and when you do, they often get shattered. However, the game does allow you to make some inferences, but not enough to ever make you feel like you have control. There's always so much gray area, so many difficulties distinguishing fact from fiction or coincidence. This game consumed me for months in terms of that. Also, you'll find that by the end, I'm happy to say that, logically, everything fits together. Near the finale, I was really worried that they built up this overall explanation towards this silly end with like a Deus Ex Machina finish, but it does keep plausibility. The only real issue I have with the mystery elements of the game is that it's kind of like the game Calvin Ball, in that you don't really ever know what rules you're playing with. Is there a way to tell if your protagonist is delusional? Is this a world where there are supernatural forces at work? When you're in the thick of it, you can't really find out. And I just find that kind of annoying that you're this player tasked with solving an unsolvable mystery. In its defense, the game itself reminds you that the fun in this kind of game is all about you, the player, trying to piece the mystery together through outside discussion and making several plausible theories. It even says at one point that any theory you can come up with makes you a winner. Yeah? So, when asked who was behind the incident? Chuck Norris and his army of Sharknadoes is my theory. Case closed. In all seriousness, it's about the quest and not the destination. And in this respect, When They Cry succeeds as a mystery story. The graphics in the game are an interesting point of discussion. First of all, in terms of the original game's graphics, these character designs are initially horrendous. Does this artist know what people look like? I'll give you a clue. Hands are not like that. However, I played a couple of chapters with the updated PS2 version graphics, and I have to say, strangely enough, I prefer the original ones better. Yeah, I'm not kidding. Having these strange, somewhat deformed character designs was funny at first, but they really give you the sense that you're in this strange little world, which adds both to the themes of the story and in how this game creates a balance between the slice of life and horror elements. Seeing these deformed character models can be both cute or terrifying, and that was cool, but the PS2 graphics just seemed rather sterile in comparison. Just my opinion. Backgrounds were limited, but they did do their job. Like any good visual novel, they allow you to fill in the blanks with your imagination, which works especially well in this small village setting. The point is, for 2 months, I was a living, breathing resident of Hinamizawa. The music in the game was fantastic, always setting the mood, carrying the scene, and a lot of it is iPod worthy. Whether it's the theme, You, or most other stuff, I have no complaints. The sound editing is worthy of some real praise. They clearly didn't have too many sound effects to work with, but they were really resourceful with what they had. For example, the cries of the Kinkatas always created this sense of dread. It was fantastic, and the musical cues were right on. And there's this one little sound clip that will turn your spine to ice within seconds every time. Want to hear it? No? Okay. I'm sorry, my hearing's not that good. In terms of everything else, there are frequent spelling errors, which wasn't that detrimental overall, and you did get some pretty great lines. This one is my favorite. Initially, it may also be hard to figure out who's speaking since there aren't any voice actors and even names above who's talking, but eventually you'll get used to it. Also, the all-cast sessions they threw in were a great addition. They added some comic relief and great fourth wall humor. In conclusion, When They Cry is one of the best experiences of gaming I've ever had. Quite simply, it's an amazing story, with lovable characters, real moments of fear, triumph, and everything in between. Sure, it can be slow, sure it tries to cover too much ground, but if you can sink yourself into it, you'll find one of the most rewarding experiences you can have as a gamer, or even as a reader. If you want to be a part of this, then search it up on Manga Gamer today, or visit the iPhone App Store, and at least buy the first chapter for $1, which is an absolute steal for what you get. In my opinion, this is a must-play for any older gamers, especially Agatha Christie lovers, mystery enthusiasts, or horror fans. Higurashi When They Cry gets my highest recommendation, and I'll see you in Hinamizawa.